Okay, so we're recording this. This is our Don't Bully Me project intake volunteer training for 2023. This is an update to the training that we did last year, and this will be both shared with new volunteers as well as posted on our resource page for volunteers that you are all probably very familiar with or will be soon. So I wanted to thank everybody for coming today or watching this after the fact. We really appreciate your willingness um, to help in this very important project. Um, to get started, I wanted to first introduce myself. I'm Ryan Cox. I'm the managing attorney at Salsa. I've been with Salsa for about a year, so I wasn't here when we did this training last year, but I'm happy to be working on this project now. I also wanted to introduce Tashana. She's our pro bono coordinator, one of our pro bono coordinators at Salsa, who's going to be working with me on this project for the foreseeable future. We're happy to have her help and get her up to speed on everything we've been up to so far. Quick agenda for what we're going to cover today. We're going to first get an introduction from Maureen about David's Legacy Foundation. We're going to talk about David's Law and the relevant statutes that come around it and how that came to be. Then we're going to really get into what we're here to talk about, the Don't Bully Me project, the DBM project, and how it stems off of David's Law, but how it involves our volunteers and our attorneys here at Salsa. We'll talk about what we do and what we don't do. We'll talk about the intake process. We'll really go through the script, how to talk to parents as a volunteer in the DBM project, and then we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about case tracking, attorney referrals, and how we close cases. Some of this stuff is very important to our ability to know who we've served and who we haven't. We have some intake frequently asked questions at the end, and then of course we'll open everything up for more broad Q&A after that. So I want to go ahead and turn it over to Maureen to introduce herself and get us started.
Thanks, Ryan. My name is Maureen Molak, and I just want to tag along to what Ryan said. Thanks, everybody, for being here. If I have not met you, I look forward to meeting you at one of our quarterly luncheons, but I really appreciate you being a part of this project. We formed David's Legacy Foundation after my son David died by suicide, and when we were struggling with what happened to him, which he was the target of relentless and devastating cyberbullying that left him helpless and hopeless. And this was 7 years ago. It's hard for me to believe that it's been 7 years. And we went to the school and we were seeking help, and we went to law enforcement and you name it, we were trying to get help, and the laws just did not line up with providing us the support that we needed. And then after we experienced that tragic death of my son David by suicide, we knew that we wanted to make sure that no other family experienced what we had experienced. So our first goal was to pass David's Law. And in that period of time when we were working on this legislation, we formed the foundation, and our mission at David's Legacy is to end cyber and all forms of bullying of children and teens through education, legislation, and legal action. And I will get into a little bit more into that in a minute. And so, like I said, our first goal was to pass David's Law, which we did in 2017. A lot of people will say that was nothing short of a miracle. Anybody who's been part of the legislative process knows it's not easy to pass a law, especially your first go around, and especially a bill that was as comprehensive as David's Law is. So I'm going to go over these resources and these David's Law and some other legislation, because it's important for you to know this, because when you are talking to parents, some of this information might get brought up in your conversation. So David's Law is a comprehensive law that affected the education code, the civil code, and the penal code. On the education code, probably the most significant piece of that is that David's Law provided the avenue for school districts and the authority for school districts to be able to investigate cyberbullying that occurs off campus if it materially affects the student's ability to go to school, it disrupts their learning environment, or it interferes with the school classroom, the day, the environment of the school. So we narrowly crafted that to make sure that it was not a First Amendment speech issue. And that's what schools were asking us, is they wanted the explicit permission to be able to do that, because what they were hearing from parents were, if they were the parents of the perpetrator, was that you don't have jurisdiction to investigate or take action on that because it happened outside of your school day. So now they have permission to be able to do that. David's Law also has the requirement in there that schools report to parents of everybody involved in a bullying or cyberbullying incident. So they must report to parents of the victim within 3 days, and the parents of the perpetrators within a reasonable amount of time. Well, that can look very different in the school setting, but most schools that we deal with have given themselves 10 days to be able to do these investigations and report to all parents involved, except for the parents of the victim. And that was key to us, because we wanted to make sure that that child was receiving the mental health supports that they needed in the situation immediately and not have to wait for 10 days. It required all school districts to have an anonymous reporting tool, so a way for students to be able to anonymously report. And it also gave schools the permission to send a child to disciplinary alternative education program or to expel them for very serious bullying or cyberbullying behavior. So there are a lot more resources in the education code, mental health requirements that schools were provided. Now, remember, this was back in 2017, and a lot has changed since then. And we'll kind of go chronologically on what's happened, and I'm going to try to go really quickly. But David's Law was the law that really started recognizing the mental health consequences of bullying and cyberbullying, and the requirement for schools to be able to provide, not necessarily provide the services, but to provide resources to parents of everybody involved in these situations. So that means, and it specifically lays it out in the education code, the victim, any bystander of bullying, and as well as the perpetrators of bullying. Next slide, please, Ryan. Thank you. Okay, so the Civil Code of David's Law, which is really the reason why we're here today. And I'm going to tell you in a minute about the story about how this all got started. But there's all, and the civil side of David's Law is where we wanted to give parents tools. So the education code, it gave educators, administrators in schools, tools to be able to address bullying and cyberbullying. The civil code is the avenue for parents to have tools. And then there is the criminal statute, the penal code that was modified in David's Law, that expanded the harassment code. So what we did was we updated it for modern technology. So before David's Law, it had things in there like fax machines and pagers. So we went in and we updated it to include things like cell phones, social media apps. And then it also created an increased penalty for certain harassment where where it's a suicide baiting, a repeat offender of cyberbullying, and a minor who disregards the civil remedies in David's Law. So let me jump to that piece real quick. So in how this got started, after my son David died, there were 2 attorneys in San Antonio that were meeting for lunch that we didn't know. And They heard about what happened to David and they said, this just can't keep happening. We are hearing more and more about social media and the impact cyberbullying is having on our young people. So what can we do to help this situation? So they were the ones that helped craft this civil piece of David's Law, and they were going to start their own nonprofit and use civil remedies to be able to help parents. And they reached out to us, let us and to meet with us. And after we met with them, it was Jimmy Carter and Clayton Smeisterla. Y'all, some of y'all may know them. And so what we said was, don't start your own nonprofit. Come be a part of David's Legacy Foundation, and let's all work together. It didn't make sense for them to start their own nonprofit. So that's a little bit of the history of how the DBM project just got started, basically over a lunch, two attorneys that really wanted to be part of the solution. And so if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so after David's Law passed in 2017, probably the next significant thing that occurred in Texas was the shooting in Santa Fe. And that's when our legislators looked at some of the provisions that we originally wanted in David's Law, and of course, some new safety mandates, and they put those in what's called the biggest school safety bill from 2019, which is SB 11. So the most important thing that came out and that's relevant to what we're talking about today is that all schools have to have what's called a safe and supportive school program team. Okay. That team has many responsibilities. One of the responsibilities of the Safe and Supportive School Program team is that they conduct what's called a behavioral threat assessment. And a threat is defined in statute. We have it listed here. It's violent threats basically against self, or a possible threat against others, and it includes bullying and cyberbullying. And so these threat assessment teams that are part of your Safe and Supportive School Program team go in and they get training at the Texas School Safety Center or through their Education Service Center, and they learn how to conduct these fact-based investigative they have approaches that they have to take. They have 11 questions that they have to ask themselves in these situations. I bring this up because when you're talking to parents, and if you get a sense that there is a threat of harm to their child, to somebody else, you can always ask them to ask their school, did they get their Safe and Supportive School Program team involved? Did they do a behavioral threat assessment on this particular situation? So SB 11 had a lot of school safety mandates in them. It also expanded a lot on some of the things that we didn't originally get in David's Law in 2017. Next slide, please, Ryan. Then in 2021, we opened up David's Law, and we call this a David's Law 2.0, and it was SB 2050. And so the preventive tools that we asked for in David's Law that did not get put in are now put in to SB 2050. So here are some of the requirements that schools have to do here. And so here's another resource for you when you're talking to parents. It is, does your school have their anti-bullying committee in place? What prevention tools does the anti-bullying committee providing to your school district? So it's important to know they all have to have a committee. They have to periodically, on an annual basis, survey their students on bullying and cyberbullying. They need to be providing lessons and curriculum to their students on an annual basis. So, again, these are resources that you will have to know that these are certain things that school districts have to do to comply. Next slide, please. And then we've got additional criminal statutes that when you're talking to parents, you will find that sometimes there's a lot of other things that come into play. You may have where there's online impersonation, where a kid opened up an Instagram account and impersonating another student. You could have, and something that we saw a lot this past year was where kids were taking videos of kids in restrooms, mostly disabled kids in restrooms, um, and posting those online. So that's invasive visual recording, right? They're not supposed to have these phones in bathrooms or dressing rooms, locker rooms, where somebody has the feels like they should be private. And so important to know that yes, there are, but you don't have to become an expert in any of these laws. You just need to know that sometimes you can tell the parent, hey, there may be other criminal statutes that come into play here. So to ask if they're talking to law enforcement, if those are a crime. Ryan, do you have anything to add to those statutes?
No, I don't. I think that's a great example of some of the advice we can give to parents, even though we don't personally handle any criminal matters at Salsa or as part of this project. Parents certainly can pursue those, and a lot of times the same action that would allow them to seek civil relief is also, you know, would have a criminal penalty associated with it as well. So it's a very good thing to know.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Maureen. And there's so much more that's awesome about what David's Legacy Foundation has been able to do over the years. And I hope if anyone has questions, you reach out to Maureen about it. It's just such a phenomenal organization. But we're going to kind of dig into our very kind of specific piece of helping with that organization is the DBM project, the Don't Bully Me project, which are also David's initials. So it's a good tribute to name this the DBM project. And essentially, this project aims to address the civil component of the promise of David's Law. And that is that parents should have the right, and now with David's Law, an easier ability to get injunctive relief in a court against another student and their parents for certain bullying behavior, right? And so what we do here at the DBM project is trying to figure out a way to make sure those parents can find lawyers that can actually help them, pursue those types of claims. Not only is because the law is new, there's just not a lot of attorneys out in practice that do this, that you could even hire to do it. A lot of parents couldn't afford it anyway. So here at Salsa, we work with volunteer attorneys across the San Antonio area, but as part of this project, all across the state to find volunteer attorneys who we can train on these issues and then get them to take these cases pro bono. So that's kind of the larger goal of the project. But before we ever get there, we have to figure out a way to talk to the parents up front and do intake. And that's why we need intake volunteers like all of you who are just the most important part of this project and talk to a lot more people than we'll ever see a courtroom about some of these issues. So what we do, we provide initial information and options to parents of for children facing bullying and cyberbullying. That it can include a broad range of options that Maureen has kind of gone through. And then we match parents with volunteer lawyers if they fit the mold for civil remedies and if they qualify financially. And what we do not do, though, is we do not sue or assist in suing school districts. As Maureen mentioned, there are some remedies that can be taken and some options to work with the school district that the parent can take on their own. But our volunteer attorneys do not sue school districts. And the David's Legacy Foundation, I know, is actively trying to work with school districts on a lot of these issues. We also do not provide assistance with criminal matters. We often will get calls from parents, who are very frustrated that the police are not pursuing something, or the district attorney maybe hasn't, moved forward with something, and that's just not something we help with. We can help with the civil side, and that is to get, you know, injunctions that would assist the parents to be able to do things on their own without criminal charges attached. Okay, so the Don't Bully Me project, to give you kind of the broad understanding of what the project is as a whole and how it works, we've made this handy little flow chart. So and it's color coded. You can see that the green parts are what the parents do. They go to the David's Legacy Foundation, they fill out a form for assistance. They may be seeking some guidance on certain issues, or they may already know about David's Law and they specifically are looking to find an attorney to help them bring some claims. So once a parent fills out that intake form then gets emailed to a special DBM project email account. The information that the parent provides comes into that email account, and that's where our intake volunteers take over. Our intake volunteers are responsible for checking the emails that come in there, the forms and the information that the parents send. Then within 72 hours, calling that parent to get, to go through the rest of the intake process in the script, which we'll talk about. Um, then, the volunteer goes through an intake checklist with the parent and discusses their goals and what they really want to see happen at the end of this. And then they decide whether, that case is a good one that should be referred to an attorney or not. And I will say right off the bat, over referring is what we're asking for. We don't want volunteers having to make like legal determinations about, whether something is a good claim or not. But that's part of the process, is deciding, this parent does want to seek help with an attorney or they don't. Then, sometimes after that, the decision is not final or we haven't been able to get in touch with the parent. So our intake volunteers at the end of their shifts, will then hand off information to the next set of volunteers, and then make sure we're using our tracking materials and closing out intakes once they're finished. We'll get into all that in some pretty good detail in a bit. At that point, if a case has been referred to for an attorney to be appointed, then that information will go to Salsa. Salsa staff will review that and make sure that it fits the requirements for that, and then find a volunteer, get them assigned, and get them in touch with the parents to potentially start with demand letters and then potentially move forward with litigation if that's necessary. And our goal is for anyone who needs that, to have them match with a volunteer attorney within 10 days of their first contact with us. And so that 72-hour turnaround time for intake volunteers to get in touch with parents is pretty important, because we rely on that to be able to meet our goal of 10 days or less to be matched with a volunteer. That's pretty much the process of how it works. Once we have a volunteer attorney assigned to a case, they kind of take over, and we don't really get too much in the weeds between clients and their attorneys, except to provide mentorship and resources that they might find helpful if they haven't done this type of case before. So what we ask of our volunteers. So for any of our volunteers that work with the DBM project, this could be attorneys, non-attorneys. It's not required that anybody have a law license to do this work, but we ask our volunteers to be on call and check DBM emails for a 1-week long shift. And then we rotate volunteers so that they have that 1-week shift about once every 2 months. Now, during that 1-week shift, volunteers call parents, like I said, who have requested assistance, and go through the various steps of providing resources, options, and potentially an attorney referral, and then passing information along to the next set of volunteers to make sure that everything has been followed up on as necessary. So It is a significant ask to be a volunteer for a full week, but as we get more volunteers, it will become more sporadic, hopefully, or longer delays between. And then just generally, in the past, there's usually between about 3 and 7 um, parents seeking assistance in 1 week. And so an individual volunteer may have to contact, somewhere around 3, 4 people if they're partnered with 2 volunteers per week. So I wanted to go over kind of the intake process in a little bit more detail. I talked about it, but especially what our intake volunteers can expect to do when it's their turn to take a 1 week shift of answering and calling and reaching out to parents in need. So first, that shift will start at the end of a business day on Friday. Um, a volunteer will receive an email from the previous week's volunteer about the status of any open intakes. So, for example, if that previous volunteer had reached out to a parent but had not been able to get a hold of them, they would email the next week's volunteer to say, this person hasn't been contacted yet. We need to try to reach out to them again. But basically, the intake volunteers process starts with an email from the previous week's volunteers. Now, at that point, the intake volunteer takes over responsibility for the DBM email account, as I mentioned. We usually work with shifts of 2 volunteers at a time, so you don't have sole responsibility. But 2 volunteers at a time generally take responsibility for checking that DBM email account for new submissions, and like I said, contacting those parents within 72 hours. At that, once you get a parent on the phone, the goal is to gather information and then provide resources based on the specific circumstances. And we'll get into the script in a little more detail in a bit. At that point, the intake volunteer updates what we call our in progress case tracking spreadsheet. So we have a spreadsheet that everyone has access to, and I'll show it to you on a slide in a bit. But that's where we keep all the information about any clients that we've talked to make sure that future volunteers knows what's going on, or SALSA staff knows what's going on with individual cases. If the parent wants to be referred to an attorney and we think they're going to qualify financially, then the next step for a volunteer is filling out an actual attorney referral form. It's a separate form. All of this and all of the things I'm talking about are all linked in a very convenient place, which I'll show you in a second. And that is a form that requires us to collect financial information and enter in other information about the case, so that it can be sent to SALSA or one of our partner organizations to find a volunteer attorney. Then, either after the parent has asked to be referred to an attorney and that process is done, or they've been provided resources and don't want to continue on that path, our volunteers have to, fill out an intake closure form for each parent that they talk to. This collects information about what we talked to the client about, any specific details, and that's really where we are able to track, um, you know, how many people we talked to, what resources they were provided, whether they wanted attorney assistance or not, and kind of collect all that kind of information. Then at the end of the week, just like it started, that's how it ends. At the end of the volunteer week, the volunteer sends an email to the next set of volunteers regarding any follow-ups that are necessary, or folks that were, cases that are still pending. So that's the general process. And this is what I was just referring to. This is the SALSA volunteer resource page. Here's a link to it, which hopefully you will all have as well. Already, it will also be included um, in our guidebooks that we send out to volunteers that will be coming out shortly. But in any event, this is the Bible for doing this work as an intake volunteer. In addition to everything I've mentioned, the rules, the login credentials for everything, it also includes all of the resources that you can see on this slide. And it will include a copy of this video itself, in case you ever need to go back and find anything that we've talked about here. It has FAQs on everything from, children with disabilities, referral opportunities to other organizations if we can't help, and some of the various things that you need to go through in doing this type of intake. Okay. I wanted to turn it back to Maureen to talk a little bit about the intake script that we use and kind of, information about how to talk to parents on these kinds of topics.
So first of all, I used to take a lot of these calls. I think before Salsa came, started helping with this, and they have been just such a blessing to us at David's Legacy Foundation to take on this project. That's the ultimate goal, is that what we're all doing today is that this can be duplicated in other states. So once again, really appreciate everybody's help with this. One of the things that I have learned over the years is that when a parent is reaching out for help, they themselves are often in a mental health crisis. For any of you who are parents, understand that when our kids are hurting, we hurt just right alongside with them. Often the parent has gone to the school district and they are having to miss work to be up at the school district quite a bit. They are worried about possibly losing their job. They are not sleeping at night. And so just know that when you get these parents, you're going to get them in various different stages. I mean, I've had parents who have just, the minute I get on the phone with them, they just start crying. So they need somebody to really to talk to them, to understand where they're coming from. And so we're doing counseling without counseling. We are providing resources to them that what we do is not offered by anyone else across the state of Texas. And so just knowing that you're a body who's listening to them can mean the world to these parents. We have a script that we're going to go through in a minute, but what I want you to know is that you do not need to read that script. As long as you provide the information in the script to the parent, because you're talking to them, you're having a conversation, real conversation with this parent, and empathizing with what they're going through and hearing their concerns. So, one other thing to remember is that obviously you're just hearing it from the parent, and they're going to say things to you like, the school district is not doing enough. They're not taking this seriously. They just want to brush it under the rug. That is the parent's perception of what is happening here. They don't often always know. The school district can't give a lot of information because of federal privacy laws. And so just kind of in the back of your mind, just knowing, okay, that's what they're thinking, and that's okay. We want to acknowledge what they're thinking, and try to help them move the needle along the way. So, the email comes in, you've read through the email, and you've got your intake script, and you kind of can tell. And I wish we had a copy. And Ryan, we need to remember to do this next time, is maybe put a copy of a example of an email that comes in, because a lot of times you can tell where the conversation is going to go by reading the information that the parent provides you in the email that comes. So the form that they fill out asks for details, kind of like a timeline. We want to hear what's going on. And then what is their desired outcome in the situation? So once you read those two things, you can really kind of tell what you're going to need to say when you make the call. All right, so we want to let them know, you want to introduce yourself, let them know you're not an attorney, you're not a mental health, you understand what's happening. So you can read through the lines, right, of the email and say, what, this parent seems like they're really in distress. I want to get to this parent pretty quickly. So if you can even just email that parent, like if you pick up let's just say you pick up an email, one comes in on a Saturday, and you pick up the email on Monday, and it's already been a couple of days, but you can't get to that parent, right? Like, you can't make that call that day. if you could just send them an email and let them know, hey, I've got this. We received it. We're going to call you back tomorrow, or, whenever, within your 72-hour period, whenever you can call them back. That just lets them know that there's somebody on the other side of that email that's got it and cares. And that can really mean a lot to these parents that are in crisis. So you introduce yourself, you talk about the project a little bit, let them know you're not an attorney or a mental health provider, but you're there to listen and you want to see how we can help them. Next slide, please. If it sounds like the child is in distress or the parent is in distress, and I've said this before, and empathizing with them and saying, like, I know that this is really difficult, and we want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself too through this process, because you got to take care of yourself so you can take care of your child. So without being judgmental of what's going on, you just want to make sure that that parent is aware that, gosh, you got to take care of yourself through this also. If they say, and I've had situations where a parent has said, my child is locked in her closet and she's crying. Okay, so in situations like that, if you get any of those, it is, call 911. You can call your police department and ask for a specifically trained mental health officer that they can send over to your home to help you with that situation. We've had kids who have barricaded themselves in rooms. We just want to make sure that if you get to the parent and something like that is happening, that you're able to give them that information right away and get off the phone until that child is in a better situation. It may not be dire like that, but they may say, I need mental health supports for my child or even for myself. They can call their local mental health authority, and there is a link that is an interactive map that will take you to the local mental health authority by school district. So when you click on this link, it takes a while for it to load. So give it a few minutes. And if you can kind of pinpoint where the school district is, and you click on that school district, it will provide you the 1-800 number of that local mental health authority that has jurisdiction over that school district. So that's another way of being able to help this parent. Next slide, please. In Bexar County, we've got a few recommendations here. These are constantly changing, so we just recommend really using that local mental health authority because that's updated in real time by the state of Texas. Next slide, please. Okay, so conversation starters. You've read the intake. One of the first things that I always ask is, okay, since you sent that form in, okay, so maybe it's been a couple of days. Has anything new happened? Where are you with the school? Have you gone to law enforcement? Have you heard back from anybody? Just sort of trying to find out from the last update that you've received through the email, what else has happened? Ask them questions like, have you looked up what your school's anti-bullying policy is and what their code of conduct is? If they're the question that says, what is your desired outcome? It may say in there, I want these children expelled. Well, that's not anything that we can help them with, but things like asking them, well, what does your student's code of conduct say for that? And what is your school administrators telling you? And just kind of encouraging, giving them resources so that they feel empowered and equipped to have conversations when they're going in and meeting with the school, if that's the avenue that they're trying to take. The David's Law one-pager that we went over at the very beginning of the presentation, that's on our website. You can lead them there if they want to know. We have a lot of resources on our website, like Ryan had mentioned. Okay, so you're going to try to figure out after listening to the parent, and they're gonna, sometimes it takes a while to kind of figure out what exactly, like sometimes they just need somebody to listen to them, right? They may say, I want to sue my school district, or I want criminal charges filed against the perpetrators. So there's going to be varying different requests of the parent of you in this situation. And so if it is motivating the school to take appropriate action, we have lots of resources that you can provide the parent. If they want to sue the school district, like Ryan said, that's not what we do. And we have some recommendations on some, of what you can provide them. Criminal charges, you know, once again, they're going to have to work with law enforcement on there. That's not what we do. And so what we do if they say, I want to talk to an attorney. And sometimes what will end up happening is they won't really realize that you've provided them what they've really asked for, which is tools to work with their school district. And then after you've explained the program to them, they may say, well, I want to go ahead and talk to an attorney. Well, we can't really deny them that. And so we would have to determine whether or not, one, do they qualify for one of the attorneys through our program, or do we need to refer them out to, another area where they can hire their own attorney or use the pro se forms that we have available on our website. I guess next slide, please, Ryan. Okay, so do you have any comments on any of that, Ryan?
No, I think we covered a couple of slides a little early, but
Okay.
my apologies for not sliding.
Okay, that's okay. So, you're going to get, right, the education code, working with the school district. You're going to get people who need to work with law enforcement. And then you're going to get, they want to be placed with an attorney. And so here is, let's see, what do we want to, do you want to cover this one, Brian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, assuming you get through those and it's not just a law enforcement issue, it's not just a school district issue, but they actually do want to seek some kind of civil relief against the bullying child or that child's parents through civil action. That's what our program does. And so we're trying to nail down if they're interested in doing that. Sometimes they don't want to because they might be worried about all kinds of things from like community relations to like um, you know some kind of retaliation or anything like that from individual people that they're seeking legal action against. But really to nail down if that's what they want to do, like Maureen said, we do have income limitations as well on top of that. Generally, that rule is 200% of the federal poverty line, depending on household size. So you don't have to do any math or any of this stuff, but when we get to the attorney referral page, it asks for a lot of financial information, and that is so that we can determine if they qualify based on those rules. And I realize that they often feel a little arbitrary. We often have families who are just on the edge of this line, but the reason we have these rules in place is because we get funding from the Texas Access to Justice Foundation for all of our programs, housing and homeless, disability, veteran services, all the things that we do. And this is a rule that's generally imposed by them for most of our work. And so that's why we have the rule, but it also kind of makes sense because with limited resources, we want to make sure that, if people can hire an attorney, that they hire one. And so, um, so once, if they want to proceed with this particular line of action, then, you have the conversation about that. And some families will tell you right up front, I'm not going to qualify for that. I don't want to bother filling out an application, in which case you move to the next options for them. Okay. Um, if they are income qualifying, you'll go through the attorney referral form, which I will show you what that looks like in a minute. But for those people who do not qualify for placement, they have a couple of options, and these are listed at the bottom of this slide. Number one, they can hire a private attorney, and we can, as part of our discussions with them on the phone, can provide them information for a lawyer referral service in their area. We have these listed on our resource page. Just like I said, everything we talk about today is on our resource page, including all the links that you could possibly need for that. So we have, information for lawyer referral services in every area of the state, plus the statewide lawyer referral service, where they can, seek to hire an attorney to do this specific work. In addition to that, some folks who, may be on this line, but also know that they can't afford an attorney, there is an option that they can file themselves. We have resources for pro se assistance. And so these are kind of fill in the blank forms that parents can use, take to their local courthouse, file it, and kind of instructions that tell them, if you're going to file this yourself, like here's some of the things to consider, and here's the specific process you have to follow. And so it's not impossible that they could do, folks can do this pro se. And right now, the Texas Supreme Court is considering um, um, standardizing those pro se forms for these kinds of cases. That hasn't been finalized yet, but as soon as those are, we'll make them available to volunteers for any parents who might be in this situation as well. And so those are generally their two options: hire an attorney or kind of do it yourself if you don't qualify for SALSA services. But we still want to try to help families through those two options, right? Give them resources to help find an attorney, or help them, figure out a way that they can do this themselves. I will say, in addition to that, SALSA does have a very limited list of some attorneys that will work with us, what we call low bono. So not for free, but they're working on very reduced fees for folks who don't qualify for legal services from us. But it's very limited, the number of cases they can take, and it's limited in geography as well, because they're attorneys who practice in, certain counties. But if you have somebody who you think, is not going to be able to do option one or option number two, but it's a case that really deserves to have some attention, then, we'd ask volunteers just to reach out to SALSA staff directly, and we'll see if we can, find someone for that type of situation. We can't guarantee that all the time, but it's something, for certain cases we want to help if we can. And that is an option potentially that we're hoping to grow, but for now it's very limited, and we'll do what we can with that. Now, if they do not want to be considered for project placement, they could, they may want to just decide that they're going to do it themselves, or work with the school district on their own, and that's totally fine. I mean, we're not trying to pressure anybody into going to file a lawsuit. We're just trying to provide those options if they have them, as well as other resources that could be helpful both for mental health and otherwise. But it is important that even if during the intake process, we're not referring someone to an attorney, that we still follow the other processes um, that SALSA uses, which is tracking those cases and then filling out intake closure forms, so that we know that we talked to them. They didn't want to seek an attorney, but we did provide these, these PDFs that we have as resources, and some links, or whatever the case may be, whatever resources were provided. We want to track that even for folks, who don't end up being part of our attorney program. Okay. So here's a few resources we wanted to go through. Maureen, could you talk about a couple of these?
Yeah, sure. So these resources you can find on our website, davidslegacy.org. And, I will say that probably, 70% of the time you get these emails, it is going to be a school-based related issue. And so it's important that we're providing some type of resources to parents so that they feel empowered to get the resolve that it is that they're looking for in this situation. So Texas has a very specific definition of bullying and cyberbullying that will allow them to take action. So this checklist was created by the Texas School Safety Center. It is the checklist and David's Law, the definition. And so you can direct them to our website, tell them to fill out this form, take it with them to the meeting that they have with their school administration. And in each one of these boxes, they need to have a check mark. and have them document in writing why they checked off, yes, in each one of those boxes, and tell them to just keep to the facts. Because a lot of times you'll get all this extra stuff in there, but when they're meeting with administrators, you can recommend some great best practices of dealing, on how they can deal with these situations. Next slide, please. This is how to advocate for your child with your school district. This is on our website. It's interactive. And so there's all these live links in there that can help a family create a timeline, best practices on meeting with your school board, working your way up the chain of command. It gives them resources that are on the Texas School Safety Center website. Gives you TEA, Texas Education Agency, how to file, open records requests and complaints with TEA. So anything basically kind of mental health, school related, you should hopefully be able to find here. Once again, lots of new resources are becoming available, and we haven't updated this in the last year, but it's definitely something that we'll be doing soon. Uh, let's
And
see.
and these are from David's Legacy website, but again, the intake volunteer resource page also includes these and links to other stuff that David's Legacy website has as well. It's really the one-stop shop where, David's Legacy resources meets kind of our legal resources and other opportunities, and, is really where we, the home base for everything here for volunteers.
Yeah, for the volunteers, but you can send parents to our
Yes.
website. So,
Yes.
and if you're emailing them, like you're following up with them with an email, like you've had a conversation and they don't want to pursue legal action, they just want to work with their school district, you can go to our website and just copy the link and send that to them in an email, and not send them the salsa, the
Right.
link, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, let me be clear about that. The
Yeah.
the volunteer resource page is for internal use only. It's just to help our volunteers have it has login credentials to our email accounts and stuff. Please do not share that with anybody who's not received our training and is volunteering with us. Specifically, I mean, we do not want to share that. But like Maureen said, these resources, links to the David's Legacy website, that's where we want to send folks for the
Yeah.
public.
So send them to our website, send them to the Texas School Safety Center, send them to TEA, but directly to those sites.
Excellent.
Okay, next.
Got it. So
Okay.
now we're going to talk about case management for intake volunteers. There's really kind of four pieces to this, and we've talked about several of them, but I want to make sure it's super clear. So the first step, our volunteers, they take responsibility for the DBM email account. Okay. During the week-long shift, that's the primary responsibility, is checking those. And then that's where you start the process of reaching out to parents and having the conversations that we've just been talking about. It's through the DBM email account. Now, the credentials to log into that account are on the volunteer resource page, like I mentioned. So it has the login and password there. So again, don't share that generally with the public. That it also has instructions for how to open that email account in Outlook, simultaneous to your work email, so you could have both open at the same time, throughout the week that you're volunteering, and kind of some other tips and tricks to, help facilitate that email account. Like we said before, that's where the new requests that are coming in from David's Legacy website, those forms will be emailed, directly to there. And we ask that, when you're communicating with the clients, you use that same email account to respond to them, to send them information, and things, because then that way all that communication will stay in that email account. We can track it. If somebody gets hit by a bus, which we hope never happens, at least we have records of like who's talked to who. And also, you don't want to share your personal information necessarily with um, with everybody who just comes in through the internet anyway. So that's kind of the general gist of the email account. And like I said, the explanation for how to log into it and everything is on the resource page. Um, the next big piece of the process here for intake management is the tracking spreadsheet. So once a volunteer sees the new request in that intake email, they will then add that to the tracking spreadsheet. Okay. There's a kind of a clip here that shows a little bit what it looks like. You can see Molly as a volunteer for certain of these last month. Um, they'll add, the person who's sent in the application. We just do it by initials to try to keep some level of anonymity, and protect people's privacy even across volunteers. But uh, we enter that information, the date that they emailed us. So we want to make sure that that helps us track how long it's taken to get in touch with them. And then if you're the first person to make contact with them, we put your information in here and the date that you made initial contact, how you contacted them, and then of some kind of status. Like I tried to call them, left a voicemail, needs follow up, or spoke to the parent. They want to call me back next Thursday, so we'll finalized then. Or, they want to wait and see what happens at their school board meeting next month and they'll call back, something like that. Now, so we want to try to get very just brief understanding of where the case is in the process in this tracking spreadsheet to help us know where the follow-ups need to be. Now, the next column you can see is the date the closure form was submitted, and that is talking about our intake closure form. So I'll show you that in a second, but this is where we want to put the date that the intake closure form was submitted on. It's on the Salsa website, and I'll show it to you. But we want to have that date in this spreadsheet because that's the last step. That's the last step for intake volunteers is to fill out that form. That lets us know what resources were given, what the circumstances were, if it was referred to an attorney or not. So whenever we look at this spreadsheet, the assumption is that any of these cases that do not have a closure form submitted and a date there of that closure form, the assumption is that that's an open case that needs follow-up. And so if you're a volunteer this week and you open this spreadsheet, right now, I'm just going to say right now, I don't believe that this spreadsheet is entirely up to date. But if you're a volunteer and you sign into this spreadsheet and you see blanks in the closure form submitted column, then that should be a case that needs some kind of follow-up. And so in addition to answering requests from the email account, also, we ask volunteers to see if there's something there that needs to be followed up on. Like if it says, I left a voicemail message and we need to call them again next week, then we ask that you try to follow up with the ones who are still open and haven't been closed yet. So that's how we're tracking that. And so we really need help to keep that information up to date. If you submit the closure form, make sure it's in here so that we know where all these cases are and nobody slips through the cracks, which unfortunately does happen from time to time. And we're trying to do our best to limit that as much as possible. So the next thing I wanted to show you is the DBM project referral process. So this is what you have to do if you want to take a client that you've talked to. They decide they do want to move forward with a civil action and they want to see if they can get a volunteer attorney to take that case. And you've already had the conversation with them that there is an income limitation. If you think, you might qualify, then we can, move forward with this referral process. At that point, you would go to this page. This link is also on the volunteer resource page as well. It's all pretty clear and this instructions are on there as well too. But essentially you would open this referral page. This is where we collect information about the client that we need to be able to establish an attorney-client relationship and refer a case to a volunteer attorney. So this is on the first page, it's just general information. Um, but as you can see, there's other questions that we have to know just for ethical rules as attorneys, like things like, are you currently being represented by another attorney? We cannot refer a case if someone's being already represented by another attorney. It asks if they're a veteran. It asks some other questions that we use for our internal tracking across all of our programs, and then it asks demographic information, and part of the application has a box here that says, what is your legal issue? And here is where we really would love as much detail as you've collected in your notes from your interview process or whatever. It may be a little cumbersome to do that, but if you've taken notes, like in a Word document or something like that, with the client as you go, it's copy and paste. But otherwise, we need to have some description here of what we're looking at, without having to reach back out to the client. And a big reason for that is, we have a roster of volunteer attorneys willing to take cases, but they don't take cases in the dark, right? And we need to be able to explain to them the specific issue, what county it's in, who the opposing parties are for conflicts purposes. And so the more detail we can provide to our volunteers, the faster we can get it assigned. So we really, ask you to put as much information in there as you can. And then on top of that, as of last month, we've rolled out a new partnership process with these referrals. And so in addition to SALSA finding volunteers, we are now partnered with Houston Volunteer Lawyers and Legal Aid of Northwest Texas, um, who will also be looking for volunteers on certain cases if they fall in their regions of the state. And so when you do this referral process, depending on what county the person lives in, this may not even go to SALSA at all, and it may be referred directly to one of those organizations for them to find a volunteer attorney. Now, we monitor those we get reports on cases that have been submitted to our partners, because especially in this early stages of this partnership, we want to make sure that things are getting assigned, that they're being, properly taken care of. So we get reports on that, but we're not necessarily providing information that's not in the application itself to our partners. So again, like having a good understanding of the legal issue involved will allow them as well to understand what the request is and what kind of volunteer they need to find, to take that case. So that's kind of a new development in all of this, that we have these partners and there's going to be automatic referrals to attorneys in those areas. And so that's new. And if you do have questions about that and how it's going to work, I'm happy to answer those at the end of the presentation. But then the last part of this referral process, again, excuse me, is that we do have to collect financial information. And so if you look at this slide, you can see an example of what this page looks like when you're looking at it. It asks for different types of income and the amounts of those income, and then so it could be income from employment, Social Security, VA disability, capital gains. It could be all kinds of things, and our system, based on the number of people in the household, kind of works automatically to determine if that's qualifying, and it won't count some certain types of income against people, like Social Security, disability, specifically. So we have to have all that information, and that's how the system determines if that person qualifies. Um, at the end of the referral process, there's an agreement, and so you're sitting there. The clients decided they want to be referred. You've gone through all this process. At the very end of it, they have to agree, that to this certain statement that says, we're not representing you right now. We're going to try to find you an attorney that'll take your case for free if you qualify. And you agree that we can, use your information to help find you an attorney. And so we ask at this last part that you actually read this thing out to them in full. And so that you're clicking these buttons for them, where they've agreed to specifically, understanding how this process works, that this is an application for legal services, that we will certainly do our best to match, but cannot always guarantee. That's the end of it. That is the end of the referral process. Once you hit this last button, continue, it will pop up a screen that will either tell you, your application has been submitted, in which case you're all done and everything worked great, or it will say that you did not qualify for services, and that will generally only be because of um, income. But if you didn't click like I agree to this statement or something, it would also reject you. So if you have any issues with this process specifically, like you're going through it, something's going wrong, like they don't have any income, but for some reason it's still kicking them out, give us a call. You can talk to me or to Shauna at Salsa, and probably other folks around our office can help you with that too. But we'll get any kinks worked out if someone should be qualifying and the referral form just isn't working for some reason. So we're happy to help with that as well. And again, the place where you find this form is like everything else on the volunteer resource page, and it has instructions there as well. And so the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, like I've mentioned a few times, is the intake case closure form. Now, this link is on our resource page. It's the last thing you do when you're done talking to the client. You've decided if they're going to be, referred to an attorney or not. You've provided all the resources and materials you're going to provide, and that's the end of the conversation, right? This is the last thing you do. So you find this on the volunteer resource page. You click this, you put in the information for the client in all of these spaces that say the caller's first name, the caller's last name, their contact information that you've collected. If for some reason the information you have doesn't match up with this, these are all required fields, but just enter zeros or something if you have to. We try to collect all this information in case we need to ever reach out to somebody. But if you don't have it, you don't have it. This is what the bottom part of the case closure form looks like. It asks you to specifically list which of the supporting materials you provided, and then at the bottom, like what's going to happen next. Are they going to go back to their school on their own? They're going to go sue the school on their own. They're doing criminal charges. They're asking us to find an attorney for them. They're going to go hire their own private attorney, or all of the above. I mean, you can click more than one box here. And then the last thing is this box, additional information. So whether they were submitted to an attorney referral or not, we also here ask you to give us as many details as you can that you may have already typed or that to give us an idea of what happened in the case generally. This form is really for our long-term tracking purposes, so we can identify problems and holes and what resources we're not providing. So we'll audit these to determine how we can improve the program in the future. But also, please include your own contact information or your name at least if you're filling this form out. Because often we've had people submit a case closure form and then we read the notes on it and it seems like, wait, that seems like a case that probably should be referred to an attorney, but we don't know who took this information, and so we need to get more facts. And so if you could include your own information of who's filling this form out or who spoke to the client directly, that would be very helpful for us when we have to go back and track people down. We really appreciate that.
Hey, Ryan, can
Okay,
I ask a question about that real quick? So
sure.
is there anything on here about, so if they want a pro bono attorney, but they don't qualify, what would they check here if that was the case?
They would check civil action via private attorney referral. So if they
Okay.
don't qualify for us, then they have the two options that said before, which is hiring their own attorney in some way or um, doing it pro se. That's generally their options. Like I also mentioned the very limited opportunity for a low bono, but that, the volunteer would have to reach out to me directly to see if we can line that up for kind of special circumstances. And in that case, I would just check the box that says other, and then in additional information, the volunteer um, can't afford a lawyer, can't figure out how to do pro se, doesn't qualify for DBM, really needs assistance with a discounted services of some kind. And as a volunteer, I've reached out to Salsa to see if we can do that. That's basically the best option I have. I think those circumstances are going to be so limited because for the vast majority of people, we just have to say, you know, I I really wish that we could help with this particular problem, but you make too much money, and so you've got to figure out how to do it. Um, I mean, that's
Okay.
just the truth of it. And okay.
Thanks.
Um, yep. So Oh, I forgot to change the year on this from last year, but for 2023, our intake volunteer calendar. If you go to the volunteer resource page that I mentioned earlier, and I will put it in the chat at the end of this uh, meeting as well, um, there is a calendar on there that lists all of our volunteers by week, by which week they're working. And in each week, there's two volunteers. So two different people to help cover in case, someone might be out that day or busy in a trial or something along, if something comes up. Two volunteers per week. Now, what's currently on there is not entirely accurate because we have had a couple of our volunteers who have asked to take some time away from volunteering. And so we're hoping to fill in those gaps with new people and to rearrange as necessary. So right now, I would say the calendar is not 100% accurate, but should be hopefully by Monday. So that's where you can find the weeks that you are scheduled. And also, my goal is to get calendar invites out to individuals who are scheduled so that you don't forget. It should be generally 1 week every 2 months, so it's not constant and all the time, but it's important that people pay attention during their week, or we have parents in crisis who are slipping through the cracks. So um, our general policy is just like if you have to schedule changes, if you can try to find someone else, one of the other volunteers who can switch weeks with you or cover, like, we'd love for that to be worked out without our intervention. But of course, we will figure it out if necessary. Like if that's not possible, let us know and either our staff will cover or we'll find someone who can. Um, uh, the weekly handoff, again, I mentioned a couple of times, is important, letting the next group of volunteers know what happened during your week, if there's anything outstanding, and then likewise getting that information at the beginning of your week from the previous volunteer. And then the only other note is that we do plan to continue having quarterly lunch meetings, which is a great way that we like to show our appreciation for all of you awesome volunteers, but also, to meet and talk about, problems we've encountered, how to make the process better and easier for volunteers, and then also to get, a nice lunch together. That's generally for our volunteers in San Antonio because that's just where we are. As we have volunteers coming in from across the state to serve as intake volunteers as well. That may not be possible, but we will still share the invitations and see if we can figure out something else if that comes up. Okay, so we do have a few frequently asked questions I wanted to go through real quick. Okay, how many calls in a week? So I mentioned a little bit before, but the busiest week, like the program has seen, I believe, is about 7 intakes happening across 2 volunteers per week. You're looking at potentially 3 or 4 parents to reach out to, and then following up potentially on what happened in the prior week. And that's about it. So on average, maybe 1 per day during the week that you're volunteering, but generally a lot less than that. I think actually it's 3 calls a week, and so it could be just a couple per volunteer per week. And again, these do ramp up depending on what week it is, based on the time of the school year. We're basically had no calls during the summer. That's generally my experience. Maureen, do you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, no, it's definitely cyclical. Like, Christmas vacation, when the kids aren't together, you're not going to see a whole lot of interactions that need to be addressed.
Yep. Okay, great. So the next one we have is where can I find more resources? We talked about this, but the Salsa Volunteer Resource page, as well as the David's Legacy Foundation website, davidslegacy.org. And if you're dealing with a difficult situation and you're just like, I don't know what to do with this, reach out to us at Salsa or reach out to Maureen, and we'll figure out a response or an answer or some kind of resources we can point someone to. Like, so even for people who don't qualify to be, assigned to a volunteer attorney, we're never going to leave them with nothing. We're going to leave them with other places to seek assistance, resources that they can use to, help themselves. And so we're always going to be, here supporting whatever, weird, crazy issue might come up. Okay. Um, so this I covered a little bit, but the question has come up quite a bit. You know, if a family is denied assistance and being referred to attorney because they don't qualify, what can we do? I think we kind of just answered that a couple of times, but again, it's going to be they're going to have to hire a private attorney, and we'll try to help them find one, or pro se assistance, basically the fill in the blank forms and instructions about how to do it themselves. And hopefully that again will get easier when the Texas Supreme Court issues standard forms across the state. So here's a good one. If I can't get in touch with the parent, when do I close that intake? So this has not been explicit in the past. We've just tried to do our best, and everybody using their best judgment, and it's really a reason why cases on our tracking spreadsheet end up staying open for a long time, and then nobody knows what to do with them. But generally, the answers that we're asking is this, and it's not a hard and fast rule. Still up to your judgment based on what a parent says to you, or the specific things that are in their application or something like that. But generally, we don't want to close out any case until we've made at least 2 phone calls, at least 2 separate emails over a 2-week period. So if someone calls on a Monday, we're not going to close that out until 2 weeks of trying to get in touch with them the following Monday. Okay. Um, at that point, we would still send them a final email that gives resources that seem relevant based on what they had in their original request, whether that's how to deal with the school, some of the documents that Maureen explained earlier, um, links to David's Legacy website, and then basically instructions that say, we've been trying to get in touch with you for a couple of weeks. Here's some resources. If you still need assistance, we ask you to please fill out a new form, a new request form. And that way, our tracking sheet will stay clean, and we'll know which cases are still waiting to be called. And, and parents who have changed their mind or don't want to hear from us or don't want to be bothered are not being emailed for months and months. So that's kind of the policy approach we're taking, but certainly still up to your judgment if you know that this family's on vacation for 2 weeks or something. So that's kind of the deal there. And then again, just how quickly do we expect phone calls? And again, that's within 72 hours. So three days. If a call comes in on Saturday, it's got to be returned by Monday. And that's the only way we can guarantee our or meet our goal of matching attorneys within 10 days. Now, I mentioned this as well. What happens if something comes up and you can't assist during your assigned week? Well, number one, you should have a partner, 2 volunteers per week. So we should have some coverage still. If you know that not to be the case, then it becomes more of an emergency. We do ask folks to try to switch weeks, get it covered with somebody else, or at the very and if none of that's possible, please let Salsa know as early as possible, but hopefully a couple weeks in advance. We cannot we're constantly at clinics all across the city. It's hard for our staff to step in and do this. And so the earlier we have notice, the earlier we can try to solve the problem, or even ask Maureen to come and answer some phone calls for a while if we can, whatever we need to do. Okay, and then the last slide here that I have is just information about our intake training binder. We issued one last year. We've got some updates to it, including a lot of this process that we've talked about today. So it's going to include quite a bit of the previous information, some new FAQs, some little bit of changes to the script, but mostly the same information, but a 2023 version that'll be updated, and then also available to be sent to our brand new volunteers as they come on. So that's it for our presentation, but we've got at least a little bit of time, 10 minutes or so. If other folks have questions, we're happy to answer them if you have any.
Question. Do you want on that spreadsheet, do you want us to log in our time, which is the very last column that is not shown on the example?
Yes, I didn't show that because it's
I
just
know, it's a
not as
very
important, but it is, we still do ask that. We, when we seek grant funding to help us fund this program and all of our programs at Salsa. They always want to know how many hours our volunteers have volunteered. And so we would love if you could share that with us. To the extent your firm, or if any of y'all are at law firms that provide credit for pro bono work, we hope you're reporting all of the time you work on this, including this training, to get credit from the firm, and share it with us too. We love to be able to tell our donors and even people like the David's Legacy Board, what our volunteers are up to. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending. This will be posted online in case you ever want to come back and look at it. And you can always email us with any questions, concerns, comments, profanities. It's okay.
Thank you, Maureen, and
Thank
thank
you
you,
all.
Ryan.
Yeah,
Talk to
thank
you
y'all
soon.
so much.
Bye.